Aloha, I'm Kirsten Turner, and this is Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com, streaming live educational and civic engagement on the internet and Oceanic Channel 16. Today we're discussing food security in Hawaii with guests Daniela Kittinger and Danya Hakeem. Daniela is a founding member of the Hawaii Food Policy Council, an organization working toward progressive food and agriculture systems through policy and education. Danya is Program Director for Hawaii Center for Food Safety, which works to protect human health and the environment from the harmful impacts of industrial agriculture on the islands. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so delighted to finally get the two of you very busy women together in one place to give us a full picture on food security for Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Daniela, I know that you've been working on issues for food production, and can you tell me a little bit more about what your organization does?
Sure. So I'm actually involved in a variety of different projects. I'm kind of all over the place, but definitely really focused on building a resilient food system for Hawaii. The Food Policy Council is definitely one of my big projects, and our major program that we've been running for the past 3 years is a policy watchdog. So we sort of track a variety of dozens of pieces of legislation that are related to the food system at the Legislature, and we broadcast those out, give people opportunities to follow that and to testify if they want
When
to.
you talk about the food system, for our
Mhm.
audience sake, can you explain all that entails?
Sure. So, we talk a lot about farm to fork. So that, it goes from producer to a distributor, usually, sometimes to a retailer, and oftentimes we think that ends at the consumer. So there's a whole supply chain that we're looking at there, but it actually doesn't end there. There's also the disposal of the food. So all of these different things work together. It's not a linear chain, it's a big web, and sometimes things go straight from the farm to the consumer. Sometimes things
Go straight from the farm to the rubbish heap, unfortunately.
Exactly. So the system is complex.
And Danya, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with food security issues?
Sure. I, as you said, am the Program Director for the Hawaii Center for Food Safety, which is a part of a larger nonprofit advocacy and public interest organization, the Center for Food Safety.
That's nationwide?
Nationwide. And in Hawaii, we aim to serve as a toolkit for Hawaii's food movement. So we provide specialty services, legal, policy, science, educational, media expertise, capacity building to community organizers working in the food movement. So that's our main focus. Our goal really is to create a democratically driven food policy, and a food policy that works for everybody, that creates a better, healthier food system for everyone.
In some of those toolkits, and you said you're supporting community organizers, what are some examples of that, of both the organizations, the movements, and the toolkit? What does it made up of?
Well, it's a broad range of work. So we offer pro bono legal services. We are the lawyers for a lot of the litigations that are happening on 3 of the counties. And we can talk about that more, Kauai, Big Island, and Maui. We draft and try to get policies passed at the Legislature. We provide trainings in person and online for community organizers. We do a lot of social media and communications trainings, tons of stuff. We write reports. We have a whole science team in our national office that helps us write reports, and we distribute the information to the community through pesticide presentations. We did animation. We have various iterations of a report. So lots of different tools and support.
What are some of the issues that are being litigated at the county level?
Well, 3 of the counties the people in those counties are trying to get regulations of the agrochemical companies. And so each county is a little bit different, but trying to regulate, trying to get more disclosure, more transparency from the large agrochemical companies and their operations.
And those companies in Hawaii are Monsanto, Syngenta, and?
You were doing great. Monsanto, Syngenta, DuPont, Pioneer, Dow Chemical, and BASF. And those are 5 of the 6 largest chemical companies in the world.
And those are focused primarily on seed production and testing of pesticides here?
Exactly. So their operations primarily focus on the testing of genetically engineered seeds. And so they're not producing any food, which is our big problem and why we focus on them. Why we focus on that, because we're trying to increase land and access to local food production and small farmers. And so what we're seeing is these large agrochemical companies using a vast majority of our prime agricultural land for testing of genetically engineered seeds and using intense amounts of toxic pesticides in those testing operations. So
it's a huge cost to Hawaii as we're trying to create more local food production to bring down the cost of imports, as well as to be more sustainable, and in order to support the local economy for people to go into small agriculture in particular.
Exactly. And the big problem we're trying to support is we want to see our state supporting local food production, and right now the majority of their focus is on supporting these large agrochemical companies, and they're not providing the incentives that we think they need to be, and Daniela can talk more about this, to support small farmers, local food production.
Daniela, do tell us some of the incentives that we'd like to see, but also most people may not be aware of how the state is supporting the large agro-industrial companies.
Right. It's tricky because, the Department of Ag their mission is to develop the agriculture industry. It's not currently economically viable for small-scale diversified farmers to make a living here. It's really, really hard, especially for entry-level farmers, people who didn't grow up in a farming background. So I think as a state, we need to be looking at how we can better invest in making those types of operations more economically viable. We don't have the conditions to make that happen right now, but we are working on it, and there's a lot of things happening that are starting to move the needle on that.
What are some of the conditions that we need to have in place in order to fertilize the growth of new farmers? Excuse the bad pun.
Well, large landowners, including the state, but other entities, community schools, other large landowners, they don't offer long-term leases often to entry-level farmers. It's too big of a risk, to be honest, and a lot of times it's not feasible for these farmers to get into something more than 10 acres, and sometimes all that's available is a 40-acre or larger plot. So economies of scale are a challenge, but farmers are aging out, so several of Hawaii's farmers are reaching retirement age, and there's not a lot of momentum of people rushing into that. And the people that are, they have a huge hurdle to face. They have financial barriers, they have skill barriers, and I think that the state can also invest in training those incoming farmers to understand how to overcome those barriers.
I know that there are some programs, I don't know how large they are, but I'm thinking in particular of the Go Farm program.
Exactly.
And the permaculture program that Matt Lynch is involved in. I believe those are all state supported.
Yeah, those are a great start, and we definitely should be just looking at how to expand those. And I think that the DOA has a beginning farmer rancher development program. Community schools is looking at ways to incentivize small-scale diversified ag, but again, it's just it's going to be, they have to weigh the risks and the benefits of how much they're willing to invest and possibly take a cut in their bottom line. But I think that if we're really going to be progressive in thinking about how we can become more food self-sufficient, that we're going to have to take those risks.
And when you say take a cut in their bottom line, you mean in terms of the state lands being leased at a lower rate, so that we're not having the same return on investment in those lands. Of course, the state is looking at making sure that they're really good stewards of the public monies. On the other hand, I know one way in which we're supporting the big agro-industrial companies is that we're leasing to them. And so maybe you can talk about that a little more.
Yeah, there's about, as far as we can tell, about 6,000 acres being leased by the Department of Ag to the large agrochemical companies at a subsidized rate. So our tax dollars are supporting those leases.
And so as a result, it's an opportunity lost to support small agribusiness. I'm wondering, have there been any studies done that show the relative income and or earning potential for seeding those small businesses versus what we're getting in income or for the lease income from the large agro-producers, and maybe looking also at the employment? I don't even know, how many people do some of these companies employ on average?
In the state, the large agrochemical companies employ about 1,400 workers, which is only about 0.23% of our workforce. So
it's very
not
small.
a lot.
And how many potential or existing small farmers are out there? Is it a lot less, and is the employment on the small farms less or more?
Much less, and a lot of the employment that that large-scale farmers, and not just the seed companies, but other large-scale industrial agriculture operations here are using are immigrant farmers. It's very, very cheap labor. It's not necessarily the kind of jobs that are going to be long-term when we're looking at a generational scale. So these immigrant farmers are, history has shown us, will be looking for better opportunities for the next generation of their children. And this is what's been happening historically in Hawaii for generations. People, then they go work in the tourism industry, they leave agriculture. So there's two different populations of incoming farmers. There's the immigrant farming population, and then there's the newcomers that I was talking about earlier, these sort of conscious younger people that are coming into farming from a more holistic perspective. And we need training opportunities for both of those populations.
Because they don't bring the knowledge base that, say, the son or daughter of a farmer locally, or even some of the immigrants, they in particular bring in a knowledge base. And so what you're saying is the next generation doesn't retain that, so we have to constantly reseed it.
Right, but I mean, I do think that there is a bit of a regime shift happening, and I do see it as positive. I mean, the conversation about local food has exploded over the past decade. And I do feel optimistic about the fact that we can build this next generation of farmers and teach the values. I mean, right now, 80% of schools in Hawaii have a school garden. I didn't have a school garden growing up, so.
And I certainly didn't.
Yeah, I mean, this is gonna be a complete regime change. This next generation is gonna really value local food systems more than any generation before it. And I believe that if we can simultaneously have that and also have the investment from the state level in providing the incubator farms and the opportunities for these people that have this new value system, that we can start to move the needle and start to produce more of our food sustainably, locally, and really start to become more sustainable and self-sufficient.
So Danya, how do we address then the big agro-industrial companies that are providing jobs, that are very well rooted, right, in our national agricultural scene, and will argue vociferously that there is a strong role to play, a very important role to play in being able to seed the larger agricultural, I want to say plantations, I'm such a Hawaii focus, but larger agricultural operations on the mainland, and also being able to feed everybody in the United States. How do we deal with that argument?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and there's no silver bullet answer to that. I think what we're seeing here is we live on a very small set of islands that don't have the luxury of these big chemical companies coming in, utilizing the land, actually depleting the soil and water resources. We need the soil and water resources to be kept here, to be used for local food production for the people here, not to be sent outside to the rest of the world. So, I mean, I don't think Hawaii is the place. While there are a lot of benefits to the chemical companies for developing their operations here, year-round growing season, there's lots of perks for them, but we don't think that they should be here.
Well, when we come back from our break, I want to have a little more discussion about how we influence that, and given the fact that we are a democracy, how can we manage some of those changes? We'll be right back with Sustainable Hawaii and two wonderfully bright young women working in the food security and production area.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Kaui Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here on Think Tech Hawaii every Friday at 3 p.m. We address issues of importance for those of us who live here on the most isolated landmass on the planet. Please come join me Fridays at 3 p.m. Mahalo.
Hi, this is Sustainable Hawaii, and we're back talking about food policy and food security for Hawaii. And Danya Hakeem was just giving us some really good insights into why there's an issue for agro-industrial use of such a large area of productive agricultural land in Hawaii, and why we might want to question that, or we definitely need to question that. Tell us a little bit more about the way in which you think we can move the dial for state policy, particularly getting our state to understand that maybe there is a net loss with making the lands available, although we get a really good return on investment in terms of a real estate leasing play from a food play. Why doesn't that work?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. I'd say right now we import about 90%, about 88% of our food. So that number is highly unsustainable, as you can imagine. It's not a secure situation. And so if we dialed that back, some studies have come out to say that if we dialed that back just 10%, we'd keep $313 million in Hawaii.
So if we've produced 10% more local food, and that means we would have to provide 10% or some percentage more, depending on the productivity of the land, agricultural land available for farmers.
Right, and the challenge is not just, as we were talking, the challenge is education of farmers, but it's also high cost of energy, it's high cost of infrastructure, and getting the farms up to standards. For organic farming, it's a really expensive and challenging certification. And even just getting the food safety certifications are really challenging for small farmers. There's also issues of distribution and processing, not having those facilities to get their products to either be made value-add products or even just get them to communities,
So
to
this
governments.
is an area where the state might be able to invest to remove or at least lower some of those costs to support smaller
So I was
farming.
going to add that right now the markets are designed so that we can extract the most from our dollar by importing the food and not by producing it locally. It's just the way that sort of the economies of scale work and the global economy. But we need, I think, going back to how the state can sort of invest in this, one of the ways that we can design a different type of market is to invest in creating local markets. And one of the ways that the state is doing a great job at this is by investing in farm-to-school initiatives. So the state just hired their first farm-to-school coordinator at the Department of Agriculture, and she's doing an amazing job connecting the dots on how to get more locally grown food into schools specifically, but that will by nature you have a ripple effect, and it'll get into all kinds of institutions. By creating those institutional markets, this is a whole huge new market that local farmers can then get their product into.
And then, as you mentioned earlier, you're training up young people to maybe want to be farmers, but even more so from a demand perspective, to demand locally produced food because that's what they've come to value.
Right. And so, there's a lot of work happening in this area, and they're starting to realize it really is a production issue. These local farmers are not able to produce the amounts needed to keep the grocery stores stocked, to make sure that there's enough for 100,000 school meals in our Department of Education. So they're looking at ways to create aggregation centers, piloting small areas, and then by creating those new markets, it's going to then trickle down to have the effect of building up.
And when you say aggregation centers, you're not talking about food production necessarily. I mean, we've gone through it and we have some ag parks in Hawaii, which have tried that and with varied success. And certainly I know there's still a movement to open more. But you're also talking about supporting in terms of through the food chain, all the way through processing and distribution.
Exactly.
Aggregating some of those roles so that you relieve the cost to the individual farmers.
Right. I mean, there's lots of different ways that food can be aggregated, and traditional distributors, they get an order and they need, 500 pounds of carrots. They will get that from whatever, even if it's organic carrots, they'll buy the organic carrots if they need conventional, but they're typically going to look at where can I get that? And it's not going to come from local farmers just because they don't know where to go find it. They can't call, 60 different farmers and get those carrots individually. There's just no way it's logistically available, but there's some new sort of social enterprises cropping up.
Well, I know Tane Dada's farm on the Big Island, and I'm forgetting, excuse me, Tane, for forgetting the name of your aggregation, but basically that was a private sector effort to pull together farmers to be able to supply to the Hawaii Island hotel industry. So that benefited all of the farmers to be able to bring them some of the local greens in particular. And that's a private sector approach, very innovative at the time. Why do we need to rely on the state to do that?
Well, the private sector approach is definitely the gold standard, and I think that we will eventually have to move in that direction. But I think that in order to get there, we are going to have a little bit of investment from the state, from foundations, from the private sector. I think that, there's a lot of really great progressive work being done by local and national large corporations in investing in these types of systems. So hopefully, I think the idea is to one day that it will be self-sustaining, but we have to give it a little bit of help before we get there. I
know one example that you're talking about for a local private investor is Ulupono Initiative.
Exactly.
So they're investing in ranching. They've invested in actual truck crops before. Who else is out there doing this?
I know I mentioned Kamehameha Schools before.
Yeah.
They have some great sustainability initiatives. They're trying to help some small farmers. They're working towards something that I think could be really great. There's Department of Agriculture initiatives. Some of the insurance companies are starting to get on board. I think we can even start to broaden the conversation to look at larger national corporations. I mean, this is in everyone's best interest, is, helping small business. So
I know one way in which that conversation has been, at least the wheels have been greased, is through Hawaii Green Growth. And both of you have been involved in Hawaii Green Growth for the food issue, the food issue. Can you talk a little bit about your initiative there?
Yeah, I've been involved only for a few months. I haven't been involved since the beginning, but I think that their model is really great in that it brings everybody together to start to realize how the pieces are connected.
And everybody being from the conservation perspective, the state perspective,
the natural
private
resource
sector.
Management.
Nonprofits, businesses, it's quite a group.
Yeah, and they pool their resources to get legislation passed. They convene conversations to connect dots between sectors. It's been really great and positive, and they're also really involved in planning the upcoming World Conservation Congress that's going to be here. There's a lot of movement around that. Everyone's swirling around trying to get some big commitments to be announced.
Will there be a food focus at the World Conservation Congress? I'm tongue-tied.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be, some sessions, but as far as big commitments, those are being worked out right now, and I think one of the major areas that we can make a showing as far as the local food movement is by making sure that what's on the menu at the actual Congress
Right.
has been produced locally. And
Better
so,
pun than mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think that's a key thing, and one of the things we're going to be following up on Sustainable Hawaii for everyone's future interest is we're going to be talking about the World Conservation Congress and how people can get involved and to be able to follow that. But with regard to what Hawaii Green Growth is doing here and now, in the Measures Group, I know that you both have been involved in trying to get some of that information pulled together for the dashboard to measure what we're doing, but also to create long-term projects whereby everyone who's involved in green growth from all the different sectors can support specific initiatives in the legislature. Perhaps you can tell me about some of those initiatives.
So the dashboard is being, for the local food target area, is being mostly informed by the statewide agricultural baseline that just came out, I think, last week. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I think it's on the DOA website. It's just a snapshot in time of what's being produced and where. It's a really great report, and for people who are data geeks or need to understand, where is the food being produced and how. It's really great. So they're using that as a baseline to then try and make progress on. So that's what the metrics piece is going to be. And then
in 2012, the state also put out a food security strategy.
Right.
Is this a follow-on from that?
It's been a while since I have followed up on that. I'm not sure what the status of that is. Are you?
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So is that strategy, though, something that people look to get ideas for how to support agriculture and food policy in particular?
Yeah, it's been a while since
Okay.
I've checked in on that, so.
I hope so, at least. Hope it's working.
Yeah.
And so, and Danya, I know you're doing some advocacy work also. Can you talk about some specific initiatives at the legislature?
Yes, we have been busy at the legislature this session. We are working primarily on getting regulation passed around the agrochemical companies' operations, particularly mandatory disclosure, which
Of
pesticides. So to give you a little more information, one of the litigations on Kauai, one of the bills that was passed on Kauai that now is in courts is a bill to have disclosure. So the chemical companies would have to tell us what chemicals they're spraying and when, and they'd have to notify us when they're spraying them, so communities would be able to close their windows, go around, be aware of what's happening. And with that information, with the chemical spray information, what they're using and when, we can actually do proper research. And so right now we're trying to get a mandatory statewide disclosure program, so expanding that Kauai Good Neighbor program, which is what it's called, which is volunteer right now, into a mandatory statewide program. Those bills unfortunately have died, so they are no more, but we made a little bit of progress on those this year. They were first introduced last year on the state level.
And I know that those bills grew out of actually more of a compromise because there was a stronger movement to actually refuse or shut down the seed company operations.
Right, so now it's just tell us what you're spraying, tell us when, and go from there. We'll then be able to do the proper research, educate the medical professionals so that they can provide proper diagnosis. We can do the studies that we need to do. The information that we have gotten from the Kauai Good Neighbor program has been incredibly helpful in better understanding what the operations and what these companies are up to. So it's incredibly helpful. So that was one of the bills. Another bill was buffer zones.
When we come back from our break, let's go on and talk about the buffer zones and other bills that you're working on.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host the show called Climate Change Beyond Outrage. We go beyond outrage to find solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I hope you will join me here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. We broadcast live from thinktechhawaii.com. Aloha and bye-bye.
Okay, I'm Jay Fidel, that's Ray Starling. We co-host a show called Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. It's really interesting. You know, Ray has a way of unzipping these guys. He asks them these questions and all this stuff tumbles out, and we find out stuff we would never know about without Ray's questions. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome, Jay. I'm very pleased to be your Ed McMahon every Wednesday at 4 o'clock here on the internet. So you can join us and see what's happening in the energy world, and there is a lot going on. So join us every Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, come around, be energized right here on Think Tech. Aloha.
Hi, we're back with Sustainable Hawaii, and we're talking about food safety and food security issues. And Danya Hakeem was just about to tell us about some of the more additional efforts that are happening at the legislature.
Yes, so speaking of compromise, we introduced another bill for a pilot program for 5 school buffer zones. So the buffer zones would be creating a space between the chemical companies and their spraying and schools, so 5 schools. Unfortunately, that bill also is not moving forward. We introduced another bill on pollinator decline. That one is not moving forward either.
Can
so
you
there's
just explain briefly what pollinator decline is so people know?
Yeah, our bees are in serious trouble. So not just bees, monarchs, other pollinators are in serious trouble. And the link primarily, the scientific link across the world is to a pesticide, a neonicotinoid pesticide, an insecticide that actually is a neurotoxin that affects the brain development of bees.
And in humans? Do we know that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's not a good chemical, but it's definitely seriously linked to pollinator decline. Some decline up to 50%. Some beekeepers are reporting up to 100% losses. So big problems there. Our monarch butterflies are also in trouble, but that is primarily linked to glyphosate, which is a commonly used pesticide called Roundup that you see in stores. So definitely big issues around pollinator decline, which is obviously heavily linked to our food system, since 1/3 of all food is pollinated by honeybees. So.
And would the bill basically not allow us to buy Roundup anymore, or what is the focus of the bill?
The focus of the bill was providing regulations around and permits around purchasing neonicotinoids. So those pesticides.
So it can be tracked and again researched, and we can look at,
right,
very clearly what the impacts are.
Right. So unfortunately, that bill isn't moving forward. So a lot, and if you're sensing a theme here, a lot of agriculture-related bills are not moving this session. There are other bills. Well, a few reasons. I think we're realizing more than ever that elections are incredibly important, and it's an election year this year, and there's some leadership in key positions at the Department of Ag and the Agricultural Committee at the Legislature that are really not interested in getting a lot of sustainable agriculture bills moving forward. So there's bills around hemp, which are moving forward currently. Hopefully that actually happens. There were some bills introduced for farmer mentorship that I don't think are moving forward, invasive species bills that aren't moving forward. So it's a challenge to get legislation passed in general, but
yeah, and sometimes things just fall through the cracks. But oftentimes, I think that some of the ones that you mentioned are not moving forward, like invasive species, passed the House but not the Senate. So
yeah, they move a little bit, but they're not getting passed.
Yeah, but so the Department of Ag, as we mentioned, they're invested in bolstering the ag industry in all of its forms. So flowers, seeds, and food, textiles are included in that. So. And of course, animal agriculture as well. So one of the big pushes is to, and I'm not sure if this is still moving forward, but the dairy, to help the dairy industry in Hawaii Island, passing legislation to get some special purpose revenue bonds, which is one way that the state can bolster different projects rather than just outright funding it. Right. It's a funding mechanism that they can use, so that's a big push.
That allows all of us to invest in it, actually.
Yeah. So, you know,
And I
obviously-
would venture to guess also that a lot of these programs need employment, they need to have personnel at the Department of Agriculture. So that's a issue every year, is getting it staffed up, because it's lost a lot of its staffing.
Yes.
And so much of the
One of the
tracking of the
bills-
data has not been happening.
Yeah, exactly. And one
Yeah.
of the bills was to have more pesticide regulators,
Mhm.
but guess what happened?
It died
It
as well.
died. So, yeah.
So
But it's
in the
definitely
state
important.
budget, are we seeing an increased request from the governor for staffing for the Department of Agriculture? Are they doing it that way instead?
I think that'll remain to be seen in the budget bill. You know, that will probably happen later in the session. We'll see what kinds of positions are inserted or taken out at the very end. But I think the governor is invested in especially the invasive species issue. So hopefully we can get a few more inspector positions for that issue at least.
Now, we were talking earlier about Hawaii Green Growth, and there are several other initiatives that you mentioned during the break. Can you share with us some of those that support
Yeah, well, so since
agriculture?
the Department of Agriculture is involved in Hawaii Green Growth, those two that I mentioned, the invasive species and the Hawaii dairy industry, are pushes from the entire network as a whole, I think led by the Department of Agriculture. And in addition, there's a procurement bill that is moving forward that's going to assist the new Farm to School program in helping them get more flexibility in the procurement code to be able to purchase food from local farmers, because right now the way that it's set up, it's next to impossible for them to be nimble enough to get the quantities that they need.
It's
for
also
institutional
because
purchasing.
they're required to look at the best return on investment again, and it's
Well,
got to
they're
be
using
lower
taxpayer
cost.
dollars, so
Right.
it has to be completely transparent. It has to be a fair process.
But it also, they're looking at the bottom line being low cost. And what we're trying to do is get people to look at the full life cycle cost of some of these things and the impacts, right? So that we're not just purchasing lowest cost, but we're purchasing greatest value for the
Right.
local community as well as our school children.
And I think it sounds maybe you're talking a little bit like about the triple bottom line, which I'm
Absolutely.
sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with. I don't know that type of language has been inserted into the procurement code yet, but I would love to see something like that.
Actually, it's in the federal procurement code, which is very interesting. So the General Services Administration that is required to do purchasing for the federal government is ahead of us on this, and they've got a tremendous set of green purchasing guidelines, and even offering up comparative products that, when purchasing for different federal agencies, they are required to look at.
There are definitely some great models in other states, and the bill that is being tracked right now is based on a similar bill in Alaska that's been really successful. So
there is hope for
definitely
broadening the consumer base for some of our local products. What are some of the ways in which you guys individually work on advancing food security and food policy for Hawaii? To put you on the spot.
You want to go
Danya?
first?
You can go.
I mean, food is, you can think of it as a value system. And I'm sure that people who are sustainability minded who watch this show are already well aware of the types of values that surround that. But, you know, I think that it's really great if you have the space to plant some stuff, you know, put some stuff in the ground and just get familiar with what it takes to grow food, because just that act is going to make you appreciate how much went into your food, and you might think twice when you're reaching for, you know, the local versus the imported carrots at the grocery store.
And you don't need very much space. I was recently at HMSA, and Tim Johns, who's one of the leaders for HMSA, actually has planter boxes in his office under the window and on the little balcony, in which he's growing tomatoes and other things.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, all of us can certainly look at the small spaces we have, and in urban places, just the tree planters around trees downtown. Do you get involved at all in the urban gardening movement here, or?
I mean, I follow it a little bit, but yeah, there's definitely some interesting things happening, especially in Kaka'ako around that. Urban Farm Hawaii has been really active.
What's
there.
it called?
Urban Farm Hawaii.
Urban Farm Hawaii.
Yeah, they have some initiatives where they're planting some food in public spaces and things like that, trying to get fruit trees planted in landscapes and things like that. So that's really, really promising.
And one of the things that my husband's done at Camp Mokuleia is they have a very long fence along the road that was just an ugly old fence. And he said, let's make it a food fence. So planting food all along that fence line. So a lot of people could look at their fences and say, how can I plant lilikoi, for example, to grow as a vine along there? What are some of the ways you're involved, Danya?
Similarly with my garden, I would say the appreciation for growing food has skyrocketed since having a garden, and it's just a small garden, but while we have prime conditions, it's still tough sometimes. And managing pests is hard. So, the challenges of, as we're trying to regulate these pesticide companies, I recognize the challenge of pests and what it takes, how much money is invested in producing food, and how hard it is. So there's a lot of incredible organic, pest management systems that I've been trying out and having a lot of fun with. And then I volunteer at there's an incredible amount of great organizations here, grassroots organizations doing really amazing work.
What is one that you volunteer at?
There's a few. One of them that I really appreciate is Pai Pai Oheia. Have you been out there? The fish pond? They do some incredible work. It's a huge fish pond. It's really great community. So I enjoy going out there.
Yeah, we didn't talk about marine fisheries or any of the ocean food sources.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's
that's
a
a
whole
whole
other
nother show.
can of worms.
Yeah, whole nother show.
Yeah. And
And-
Daniela does some great work with that. So.
Yeah, my husband's actually, his organization is doing a lot of work around seafood security. And, so that's where our worlds intersect, which is kind of nice.
Wonderful. So how would you challenge our audience? Maybe look into that camera. And Danya, you first. What is one thing you would ask people to do?
I would ask them to support their local farmer. Eat locally, go to the farmer's market, learn about the food that's native to this place, and buy it, try to cook it, see what it's like.
Daniela?
It's worth it.
There's a lot of individual actions that you can take in your own backyard, but I think maybe since this show is about food policy, I would like to tell people, don't be intimidated by the policy process. It's easy. The website that we have here is incredibly useful. You can go onto our website at hawaiifoodpolicycouncil.org and find out all the bills that we're tracking, and it's really easy to just go find one that you're passionate about and just click a button to submit testimony, and it makes such a difference. It really does. The legislators are listening, and the bills are there. That we need the political will, and we need people to step up in order to make them actually go through.
Well, I encourage you guys to keep up your phenomenal work. It's very important, and I really appreciate you coming on to help educate us about what's happening out there. And I promise to continue eating local food.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have you back to catch us up later in the year.
Okay,
Great.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Aloha and thank you. This has been Sustainable Hawaii. Join us next week, Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. Aloha.